Welcome to Work Life Leader Live. I'm Julie Cohen. I'm the CEO of Work Life Leader. We're a leadership development, executive coaching and training company. And I want to welcome you to this conversation. Work Life Leader Live is a platform that I've been using to talk with smart people about interesting things in the intersection of work, life, and leadership. And we've been doing this in a couple different ways. Work Life Leader Chat, where we talk about very specific topics related to leadership, as well as today, which is the Work Life Leader Live book group. And I'm really excited today. We're going to be talking about a fantastic book, The 100-Year Life, Living and Working in the Age of Longevity by Lynda, Gratton, and Andrew Scott. This is the book. And I have two amazing guests today. This is our first Work Life Leader Live with two guests instead of one. So it's my honor. I want to bring on two amazing leaders that I admire and respect. Welcome. We have Dragana and Sarah here. How are you both doing?
Good.
Dragana, how are you?
Great. Thanks. Thanks for having us, Julie.
Yeah, well, let me introduce you first. That is Dragana Dilas, and Dragana works at World Education Services, where she is the team lead for document specialists, and she has over 10 years of experience in the field of education. And my second partner in discussion is Sarah Nadif. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Sarah is also a leader at World Education Services, and she has over 6 years experience in managing projects and applications, and is currently responsible for the technology project portfolio at World Education Services. So World Education Services is an organization, I'm just trying to get my head so I'm not in the logo so you can see me, is an organization that I've had the honor to work with, and Dragana and Sarah are two of the very wise leaders in that organization. So we're really excited to be talking about this book. This is a book that I actually give to all of my clients, and I've been giving it to clients for probably the past 5 years, because I think it came out in 2016, the first edition, and I think everyone should read it. Every professional that's working now and will be working in the next 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years should be reading this. So we're going to delve into that. But before we do, a couple things. If you're watching us live, so it is Wednesday, March 17th. It's 4:30 Eastern in the afternoon. That's 1:30 Pacific. And if you're up late in Europe, it's in the evening. If you're here watching live, please introduce yourself, say hello, and use hashtag live so we know you're here. And we're going to be coming to you throughout our conversation today, getting your input, getting your questions. We really want to hear from you and get your input as we dive into the book. So as the title of the book lets you know, we're talking about what it's going to be like if you have a 100-year life. So I always like to start these conversations with an icebreaker. And today's icebreaker is, if you imagine yourself living 100 years, what do you think about that? How do you think? How do you feel about that? And Sarah, I'm going to ask you to start.
Sure.
What's up with that?
I definitely see it as an opportunity to spend more time with loved ones. So I'm definitely excited about it, and definitely see it as a gift.
Oh, good. Wow. Well, so it's interesting that you say gift, because that's one part of the book that the authors talk about. Is this a gift or is this a curse? So we'll probably get into that, but thank you for that. Dragana, what about you? How do you feel about this?
Definitely a gift. I would agree with Sarah. My first thought was, great, I get to see my kids going to, university and beyond. However, I do have some apprehension actually after reading the book, because I realized, there is so much I have to adjust to. There will be so much I have to adapt to. Will I be able to do that? And my eternal dilemma of, balancing things in life. Will I be able to maintain that balance in order to live these many years happily and, in my maximum capacity? So before starting the book, I was like, oh, great. This is great statistics that we will have a chance to live this long. But actually, after reading the book, I did have, question marks regarding this potential.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to answer too, because I always like to answer the icebreaker. But before I do, I want to go to the audience. First of all, I want to say hello. Steve Shack has joined us. Hello, Steve. Glad you're here. Steve is someone I know well. He's a work-life leader executive coach, and not sure if you read the book, but even if you haven't read the book, so just so if you're tuning in now, you do not have to have read the book at all to get a lot of value. We're going to be talking about the book and the big takeaways from it, so you can gain both insight and value without reading the book, although I recommend you read it. So if you're watching live and now, we'd love to hear, what do you think about the idea of living to 100 years and what that means to you, and how you think it might affect you? Is it a gift? Is it a curse? Share in the chat box, and we'll talk about your thoughts. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So for me, I too think it's a gift, and I'm somewhat older than both of you. So the demographics from the book showed that, I think they said, if you were born in 2007, there is the expectation that the majority of people will live to 100 or above. And each generation going back, like each decade, I think you lose maybe like somewhere between 1.5 to 2 years. So for me, I'm probably gonna, if the demographics are right, I'll live into my early to mid 90s. But I plan to live, like, I'm aiming for 120. Just so to me, that just feels inspiring, because I have a lot to do. Like I don't imagine slowing down at 60, 70, 80. So to me, it's like, I want to really think strategically, how do I keep myself vibrant, engaged, active, as long as possible, which again, that's what the book talks about. So I want to pause. We have some comments and some folks who are saying hello. So Steve Shack said opens a lot of opportunities, which again, it's a lens of what you look through. And Dragana, I'm going to come back to you. I want to hear your thoughts. Actually, why don't we go right to your thoughts? You talked about a blessing, but also, some concerns. So let's talk about what are some of the concerns that you have when you think about that.
I think the concerns are that, if we have the multi-stage life, which requires multiple transitions and also flexibility and ability to adjust and pivot multiple times throughout life, each of these transitions, and I think that the authors acknowledge that, require also, are not as smooth. So we can envision them theoretically, going from one stage to another smoothly, and utilizing all of these strategies to maintain these transitions. But I know that in life, things get a little bit more complicated, especially once you factor in family and kids, partnerships, even changing the country. And so I was reflecting back on my own experience where, in my mid-30s, I decided to change the country, and how I envisioned it before I did that as like full potential and opportunity only. But in fact, once you go through that transition, it does feel that the price is kind of higher, and just maintaining that balance through these multiple transitions, even in your 60s and 70s, I imagine it gets even a little bit more complicated. This is what made me thinking, how theoretically I can all see it working out, and it fits into my worldview perfectly, because I'm an optimist and I see the life as opportunity to be grabbed and grasped. But on the other hand, from my experience so far, I also understand that there are limits.
Yeah.
So I like that the authors do acknowledge that they're saying, each of these transitions is not as smooth in life, and there are multiple scenarios that we haven't accounted for and we couldn't account for in the book. Yeah.
So we're going to talk about those transitions because their concepts around transitions and transformational assets are really important. So Sarah, I'm going to come to you next. And I'm going to ask you, but I want to, the next question, I want to hear what your favorite part of the books were. So I think we can each share kind of what we found to be the most interesting or insightful or motivating. And we can delve, that'll take us in a bunch of different directions, but we have a couple comments. So Stephen Battaglia, it's great. We have someone who's read the book, which again, you don't have to, but we'd love more input. So Stephen read the book and he actually met one of the authors, Lynda Gratton, and I'll reintroduce the book. We're talking about The 100-Year Life by Lynda Gratton and Andrew Scott. And the subtitle of the book is Living and Working in the Age of Longevity. We have some hellos. So Yu Zhang is here watching. She wants to say hello to everyone. And Yu Zhang, I assume you read the book. I don't know if you did or had time for that, but I know you have it in your library. So we'd love to hear from you because we're going to now begin to kind of peel the onion or open the cover of the book and look at what we found really valuable. And then last but not least, there's someone, for some reason, I don't know who you are, your name isn't coming up, but they said agrees so much, the desire for the opportunity to see my kids grow up in life. So, that issue of family and a supportive family and being engaged in your family is another theme of the book that we will talk about. So Sarah, tell me, what do you think? What was your favorite part of the book? What did you find most valuable, interesting?
Definitely most interesting part for me was the intangible assets. When you think about 100-year life and you mainly, or at a first glance, you think about how am I going to finance that? Because, if I retire at 65, I won't be able to live comfortably until I'm 100 years old. So I learned a lot about the intangible assets, the importance of investing in relationships, networking, education, and health to help you through those transitions that Dragana was mentioning before as well.
Yeah, so we're going to delve into that. So to clarify for those of you who are watching and may have not read the book, so Sarah brings up a couple really eye-opening things that the authors bring to the forefront. If we are living 100 years, and Sarah and I, we talked about this previous, our parents' generation or our grandparents' generation, depending on how old your family, how old you are, and your relatives are, they often had what was called, according to the authors, a 3-stage life. There was education, and that was usually from 18 to 22 or 24 or 20, in the early 20s. Then you worked for about 4 years, and then you retired around 60, 65, usually 65. And then your retirement was anywhere from, 10 to 15 years. And that was it. And so, the core premise of this book is if we're working and living healthy and our health span is expanding, meaning, we're not only living to 100 longer, we may be active and vibrant and healthy well into our 90s. And as medicine, continues to evolve and people continue to take better care of themselves. And so this 3-stage life is not sustainable, which, kind of what Sarah was implying, financially, 40 years of work and investments will not support 30 years of non-work. And so that was kind of the scary side, like, are you saving enough? And do you understand finances? And there's a whole chapter in that about that. So that's awesome. And then we're going to get to intangible assets because we could have the whole conversation about that. But Dragana, why don't you share what your favorite part was? What was your big aha or something from the book?
There were a couple, but I think I was also mostly impressed by the importance of intangible assets. And I don't know what your thoughts on this are, but my impression was that the authors, in the end, even though they considered all of these different aspects, all of these different assets that we have to account for, that intangible assets are the foundation of everything, and that, you know, if you don't have intangible assets, you won't have tangible assets ultimately. And I love their idea that they are irreversible. We cannot, you know, once you lose them, you can hardly get them back. Once you destroy some friendships or your health or your well-being, it's something that cannot be easily substituted. And for this, it is more valuable.
So I'm going to kind of explain for our viewers, because if you're watching and haven't read the book, these themes that we're talking about, that we're going to delve into now, are intangible assets. And these are things that, like they said, they're things we personally develop and have to sustain in order to live a long and healthy life. And the other concept we're going to look at that I think is really powerful is, instead of living this 3-stage life, education, work, retirement, the author's premise, we need to be thinking about a 5-stage life. And they gave examples of what a 4-stage life could look like, but their premise is a 5-stage life. And we're going to talk about what these other stages are. So, but we'll get to those. So start thinking about yourself, like as you imagine yourself living 100 years, and instead of working from 25 to 65, that you might be working to 75 to 80. What do you think? Or to 85? My father actually worked till 85. He's 90. He'll be 90 next month. The kind of job he worked in, he didn't kind of come up to some of these challenges, but he definitely, was not sitting at home until he was 85. But think about what you would want to do if you're working 80 until you're 85. So we'd love to hear your comments if you're watching live or not. Put comments in the chat box, and we definitely want to answer questions that you have about the book, as well as hear your thoughts on the topics we're going to talk about. So let me explain what they talk about as the intangible assets, and then both Dragana and Sarah can kind of riff on which ones you want to follow on. But there's 3 categories of intangible assets, and they are the productive assets, which include learning and education, innovation and creativity, and what they call professional social capital, your posse, so the people around you that you work with, and then your reputation. So those are your productive assets. The second category of assets are your vitality assets, which include fitness and health, balanced living, and regenerative friendships. And then the third category of intangible assets were transformational assets, and that was self-knowledge and a diverse network. So let's talk about these and kind of maybe how you're developing now and what you think you might need to be doing differently in a 100-year life. Sarah, do you want to go first on that? Like productive, like just in general, you can talk about any of them or anything that struck you about this concept of these assets.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out the importance of, so one of the productive assets, the professional social capital, and like your posse. So basically your network of close professional relationships with like mutual trust, who can coach each other and introduce each other to their networks and are prepared to give each other valuable advice. That's something that maybe not everybody is as deliberate about or mindful of, which I just wanted to point out the importance of this. And actually, I consider Dragana to be in my own like posse. We have one-on-ones every 2 weeks, and we kind of coach each other, give each other advice, and it's been invaluable to me.
Well, and it's interesting that you talk about that. So so from the book concept is, so this, if you're having multiple stages of your life and career, and let me introduce the stages, because I think the stages and the intangible assets really work together. So instead of just, again, education, work, retirement, some of the other states, there'll be multiple stages. One, this is my favorite. One is called juvenescence. And this is where it's the state of being young or growing young. And so this is where you boost your vitality assets and your outlook on life, keeping you younger for longer. So you actually put yourself in situations where you're working with younger people, you're working in kind of cutting edge kind of topics that keep you sharp. Some other stages, becoming an explorer, and they use the term galumphing, where you see the world, you travel and you experience diverse cultures, diverse people, diverse food, and you expand your network globally. Being an independent producer, this is where the gig economy, where you may have your own business, or you may so you might be entrepreneurial, or they call, you might have a pop-up, you might go work for an organization for a small period of time, and then a portfolio career. You may have do multiple things at once. You may work for an organization for X part of time, maybe 20 or 30%. You might work for a nonprofit 20, 30%, and you might be an advisor or a consultant 20%. So these are the stages. So you might, education now may no longer be 18 to 22. Education might, for you, you might travel from 18 to 22, and then do a couple years of education, and then work in a traditional employment, and then do this and that. So it's almost like you can pick and choose depending on where you go. So now, looking at those intangible assets in the concept of all these different stages, you can see how important it is to stay connected and healthy, and be able to navigate transitions. So I just wanted to introduce that concept to everyone who's watching. And now, Dragana, I want to bring it back to you on your thoughts on the tangible assets. That's so cool that you two are connecting that way and building that meaningful relationship.
Yeah. I really appreciate our one-on-ones. I would say that what would the intangible aspect of an intangible assets that kind of made me thinking was the one focusing on productive assets, and adjusting myself to changes in the future of work. So I was thinking, okay, what are the skills that might be valuable and needed in the future? What are the courses that can benefit me in the future? And having had some liberal arts education in the past, I was intrigued by the idea that, it's not just technology that is something that is going to drive the future of work forward, but it's also perhaps skills that we gain in liberal arts and that are not imitable by technology, and critical thinking, empathy. So this really made me think, and I was intrigued. And this is something that I also personally find appealing: the idea of lifelong learning. And I like that this book advocates that and sees it as one of the solutions and one of the approaches to multi-stage life.
Well, and so that was really interesting to me. So in the book, they give 3 case studies of someone, I can't remember what decade. Was it someone born in the 50s, someone born in the 40s, someone born in the 60s or 70s, and then someone born in the 90s, maybe, something like that. Because one of them was close to my age. The middle guy was kind of most aligned with my age. And, they, for the person who was the oldest person, the one who's maybe born in the late 40s or early 50s, he was educated. He had he got a degree, and what he learned in school from 18 to 22 fueled his whole career. And that was in the era where, you work for 1 or 2 companies, and, that's been gone for a very long time. And, it's the future of work is going to, that will be a dinosaur. I mean, it's not, some people still do that, but, your education supporting you for 40 years and not, having significant reskilling is, I think is going to be a thing of the past. Thoughts on that, Sarah? What Dragana said? Anything you want to add to that? Other tangible assets? I'd love to talk more about vitality assets also, and seeing how it's critical to careers. Right now, companies don't think of, most companies, I don't want to say all companies, but a lot of companies don't think of vitality assets as something that they need to consider for their employees, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing, in response to what we were talking about before, is that reading this really made me realize that I'm not going to do, the same thing forever, and the world around me is going to change. So really investing in those assets and, invest in education, going through those transformations will help me get to that point later on in my career to be able to support or grow my financial assets.
Yeah.
As needed.
So, it's interesting, and I'm going to come from a place of, looking at organizations. I know a bunch of people who said they might be attending were in the human resources field. So if you're watching this and you're in HR, I definitely want to hear your thoughts, what this might mean if you have employees now that you have to support them because they now may be working into their 60s, 70s, and 80s, where in the past you were probably thinking about, when employees are in their 50s or approaching their late 50s and early 60s, oh, they're going to retire soon. So I'd be really curious if you're working in HR in an organization, how you think this is going to change your organization or your role as a human resources leader. Because I think companies, that was another part of the book that's really important, is companies need to be thinking about their employees, their talent very differently. And countries and governments need to be thinking about kind of how they set up policies and programs to support, lifelong learners and lifelong leaders. I mean, you both work in the education field. This is going to change the shape of education. I mean, education is already changing before the pandemic. It's changed. It will be changing significantly because of the pandemic. But, an upside for education is, there might be a lot of people now, reskilling significantly at different stages in their life where they may not have been. So, and any thoughts on the education? Any other thoughts on the education piece, either from a professional standpoint or from a personal standpoint?
Yeah, I was thinking about, the authors also mentioned MOOCs and open, source courses that we can basically attend from anywhere, anytime, and also how our education and professional development is going to be credentialized and split into smaller pieces, so to say. So instead of getting like one degree, you might get multiple micro credentials.
Yep.
And working in the field that we are working in, we already see this happening. So micro credentials are becoming common, and not only common but also embraced by many companies and encouraged. So this was something interesting to see that it's reality already. And I think discussed this before also, how the pandemic pushed and accelerated this movement towards digital remote learning. So we are all now connecting like that. And I think that we have to consider education like much more fluidly that we used to before.
Can you give an example of a micro credential for people who are watching? Like, is there like a specific credential, like just and any credential that might fit that?
Mm-hmm. So I recently attended a webinar, for example, and the webinar was on micro credentials. And so they offered a workshop and they offered a lecture. And so after that, you had to do like a small test and like just give your opinion of the insights that you gained during the workshop. And that would in itself give you a small digital badge that you can then post on your LinkedIn or share on your networks. So this is a micro mini course, so to say, that teaches you a certain skill. So micro credential can be something that is focused on one skill, and this is usually, it doesn't take much time. and you can stack them. So, for example, you want to do a certificate in, I don't know, adult learning and adult education. So you would do multiple mini courses that would all be mini credentials, micro credentials, and you would stack them towards that certificate. Most of them are kind of represented by the digital badge that you get to, place either online or on your social networks. So I think it's changing the idea of, one long, arduous trip through educational experience and earning your bachelor's or master's.
Right. I'm gonna, Sarah, I'm just gonna reintroduce everybody, and then I'm gonna come to you. So I want to just say hello to everyone who's watching. This is Work Life Leader Live, and this is our book discussion, and we're talking about The 100-Year Life, Living and Working in an Age of Longevity by Lynda Gratton and Andrew Scott. This is an important book, and all three of us affirm, regardless of where you are on your career, we need to be thinking differently about how we're going to, work, live, and lead with the concept of us living a much longer life and a longer healthy life. And I'm speaking with two leaders, Sarah Nadif and Dragana Dilas, both who work at World Education Services. So go ahead, Sarah. Tell me what you were going to say.
So I just wanted to give another example that I've seen a lot working in technology is that, as opposed to obtaining a degree in, computer science, you could also do these courses in a specific programming language, so that you could use that to apply for certain jobs without needing to do the full course set. I've been seeing that a lot, and it works very well. And I do see that also, the benefits of that, if you have a longer career, that maybe when you went to school, the world looked very different from towards the end of your career. So kind of reskilling and getting those additional, getting that additional knowledge later down the line is very useful.
It's interesting. So you use the word reskilling. These were two other phases that actually excite me the most, that they talked about. And they're called the transitional phases. And so, again, if you imagine working now from, potentially 18 to 80, 85, 90, the idea of doing nonstop and working at the same intensity for this entire period of time is not sustainable. And so the transitions they talk about are two. One is called a recharge, where you may take a sabbatical. You may decide to, travel the world and, explore your interests, or, take a business interest, on the road and see what happens with that. But it's where the intensity of your work is diminished significantly, or you're stepping away from a traditional revenue earning time. It may be, if you have a family and you're stepping back to do full-time care of any person in your family, it could be that piece too. But it's you're stepping back from the intensity to recharge. The other transition phase is spelled recreation, RECREATION, but they add a hyphen, and it's called recreation. And so this is where, again, you do education, maybe 18 to 22, but as Sarah said, that's not going to sustain you in the pace that, our world is evolving. And so this recreation might mean, at 30 or 50 or 70, you go back and potentially completely reskill, or, these micro credentials. Those are kind of the different ends of the continuum, continually getting micro credentials to address, kind of your preferred path. On the other end is, completely reskilling, doing something completely different, pulling back, recreating yourself. And and then anywhere in between. So both of those really excite me. As someone who's worked nonstop, actually since my first job, I was 13, and I worked through college and graduate school. So I've worked 40 years now. I just told my age. So the idea of a sabbatical sounds really interesting to me, or a recreation and a recharge. So I was curious. Okay, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on those or any of the stuff. So we bring in so many interesting topics. I'm gonna see if there's anyone who's watching us and wants to, either share their thoughts on these concepts that we've introduced, these different stages, these the intangible assets, and much broader life, like what this means to you, what you're excited about from what we shared, any questions or comments you have about this, what you think you might need to do differently, what you might even be concerned about. And if you're working, if you're in leadership in an organization, whether it's human resources or you have a team or you lead, an organization, what do you think it means for your company or organization if people are going to be working and living longer? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Put them in the comment sections and we'll talk about them. But back to you. Who is it? Wait, I got so excited. Sarah, it was you who were going to say something next, right? Was it you or is it Dragana? One of you looked like you wanted to talk.
It might have been Dragana, but I don't know if you had something.
Okay.
There's something that
you
I
can
want
go
to say
ahead,
also,
Sarah.
but I can. Okay. So I did want to say that it's kind of the idea of going through those transitions in the future are kind of scary to me, because it means like letting go of something that you're used to, that is kind of like a security. So that's something that, really made me think about, like, how do I get ready to go through a transition like that later down the line?
Yeah. Well, and so you ask a really good question. How does one get ready? And I think that concept where if we're looking at this multi-stage life and this becomes the way of how someone can sustain a 60, 70-year career, it will become more of a norm. And from a financial standpoint, if you are going to recharge or do a recreation phase, you will have planned for it. So you might have had a 5 or a 10-year period of high earning, traditional employment where, you were a senior executive or, had a very significant position where you earned a lot of money and you saved a lot of money. So then you could fund this. Right. From an organizational standpoint, organizations now may need to start thinking about how are they funding their talent? How are they providing opportunities for recreation and recharging? So that's, I think, where organizations and governments are going to need to be thinking differently so they can do that. But I can understand, the fear when it's something, you haven't done and you don't see many people doing that. You don't probably see a lot of people taking a chunk of time off. I know when I do, I have a colleague who decided to take a gap year with her husband and 2 children. They were planning to do it before the pandemic, but then the pandemic happened and they still decided to do it. And they had to change it. But she, really stepped back for a year. And I was like, oh, it's the height of her business. Like, I can't imagine stepping back now in a year when, so much is going on. But she planned for it and communicated and, is reaping the benefits. What are your thoughts, Dragana, around recharging and recreation?
I found it interesting how these two, phases or these two models of transitioning differ. So recharging is basically just stepping back and then, boosting your vitality assets, and then perhaps going into the same role, but just with a different mindset. And then recreation is where you really expose yourself to something different. And I was thinking like, how would you do this? And they mentioned crucible, I think, experiences.
Yeah.
trying to expose yourself to something radically different and trying to see the world from other people's perspectives. So that was interesting. And, you know, the way they linked it to rituals and the role that rituals previously in the past had when people were transitioning between one phase to another. And so you had to go through some kind of ritual experience in order to make that switch from adolescence into adulthood and so on. And so these crucible experiences, or, you know, recreating yourself maybe through either education or, you know, traveling, exposing yourself to something different. This is very interesting to me. But again, I do have some, you know, suspicion around that, in the sense that, you know, I feel that each transition, as Sarah pointed out, also has some costs. And, you know, these transitional phases are investing in vitality aspect, but then you really go, you have to be mindful of your tangible aspects. You can't have them both at the same time while you're transitioning. So that's one thing.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting. It's almost like you have to have like this intangible asset bank.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and you also have to be mindful of your financial assets. So we would be remiss if we didn't comment that there was a whole chapter on finances, and it went very much that every person needs to be financially literate, and a lot of us aren't. I know for myself, until a significant time in my life, I kind of just, you know, lived paycheck to paycheck, and just, you know, if I wanted to buy a book and I had enough money in my account, I did it, you know. But it wasn't until I had a kid that I started thinking, you know, much more holistically about finances and, you know, preparing. And so I think there's this need to be more mindful, you know, especially in certain countries where there isn't a social safety net. Speaking of like America, where it's not as you know, central to how our government operates. So you have to be mindful of that. And there is that benefit and cost. And they did talk about, and, you know, and this is really important. All three, and this maybe to me was maybe a downside of the book, which we should actually, you know, we have a couple minutes left. We could even see, you know, kind of a critique. Are there things that we think could be better? The three examples that they gave, and this was, again, the book was written in, I think it was 2016. The three examples of the different people, they all had partners. You know, they were all, you know, they weren't necessarily dual income, because I think the first example, the person who was three, you know, who's kind of the oldest person, I think his wife he had a wife and she stayed at home. So, but the other two definitely had partners, and it was a fairly traditional, I mean, I think the two, you know, younger examples, you know, they were dual income, they were both working. But I think that's a shortcoming, because I think, as, you know, with more and more diversity, you know, families are going to look very different. You know, there's going to be there's many single households now with children and all sorts of combinations. They did acknowledge that there's going to be a lot more multi-generational households. You know, maybe 3 generations and even 4 generations living together, which there's some assets and some cost to that. So I think that might be my core kind of critique of it, is that the examples were not diverse enough. My guess is, you know, 6 years later, that I would imagine there's going to be another edition of the book, and that diversity will come into this. So, so there's so many things we could go. So I don't know if you want to give thoughts on, you know, any critique on the book, or you keep going on these assets. And there's a couple other, the one other thing I want to make sure we get to, and we're coming up to the end soon, and I want to see if there's any other questions. You know, we're going to probably wrap up in the next 5 or 6 minutes. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat box. We're talking about the 100-year life, living and working in an age of longevity, and we want to, if you have any other questions, we want to get to them before we wrap up. The other thing I thought was really important is this concept of age agnosticism, that age and stage are going to separate. So in the past, you know, education, you were 18 to 22 or 23. You know, work was, you know, 23 to 60, and retirement was 60 to 65. All of these stages that we've talked about could happen anywhere. in any time. And so that to me is very exciting. So Sarah or Dragana, do you want to, is there anything you think would make the book better, or anything that you think was missing, or that you were left wanting as you were reading it?
Sarah, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I wanted to comment, but on something else. So that the stages are age agnostic. So if you want to go ahead first, Dragana.
Yeah, so I was thinking that, as you pointed out, Julie, one thing that the book didn't account for was, non-standard households.
Yes.
But also what it might look like in developing countries, a longer life. So I feel that, the points that book discussed were mostly related to developed countries.
Yeah.
And something that I personally kept asking myself is like, how do I balance long-term planning with living in the moment? Because I feel that, a great deal of vitality and mental and physical health is being able to live in the moment. So, enjoying life, being able to maybe sometimes spend more money just because, it brings you joy. So just that fine balance and addressing that balance, building that mindfulness and self-awareness muscle, I think I loved a lot of strategies that they suggested, but this is one strategy that I kept missing, because they also emphasize the importance of self-awareness, knowing your values, knowing where you're going in life in order to sustain it for so long. And then, I kept wondering, like, okay, what is there to help? Is it psychotherapy? Is it meditation? It's
your
yoga?
coach. It's working with your coach, of course, right?
Yeah, and working with your coach, exactly. Yes. So so that's these are two major questions, like what these scenarios would look like, in developing countries, and also how do I balance these two perspectives of living in the now, which I believe is really crucial to being healthy physically and mentally, and then planning for the future.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think they did acknowledge that in the beginning, that this was definitely geared towards, kind of developing nations, and it comes from a place of privilege, for sure. There's a lot of people who that will not necessarily get to experience this by nature of kind of how governments and structures are not necessarily supportive of people who are at different stages, kind of countries that are developing differently. So you're spot on. Sarah, what were you going to say?
Yeah, just about like the multi-stage lives that we're going to have, and that it's important for companies to be open to that, where, I feel like how it's been so far is more like linear. So maybe someone at an older age, it's going to be harder for them, that if they go through some kind of transformation and are looking for an entry-level job in a certain field, that companies aren't as open to that yet. And hopefully that'll change in the future. Because, if later in your career you decide to switch and need to start like from an entry-level position, you should have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah. And that actually is starting somewhat. Some organizations are looking at internships for parents who've taken significant gaps, who've taken significant time off, for care of family or children. And so there are actually internship programs for, there are now 40-year-old interns, for those of you who saw that movie. They're definitely, that is becoming a thing. And I think we'll see that, where companies will see that is an asset to have a 40-year-old or a 60-year-old who brings a wealth of skills that, a 25-year-old may not have, just by nature of maturity and experience. So I think we will see that. So as we wrap up, we're going to wrap up in the next minute or two. I want to go to each of you and share, what's the one nugget that you're walking, when you shut the book, when you finished it, you were like, yeah, I'm going to take this with me.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Sarah, you go first.
I'd say
Sarah.
definitely throwing out that 3-stage life out of the window. Forget about that and really think about how am I going to go through transformations in my life.
Awesome. Thank you. Dragana?
Same as Sarah, and I would maybe add this sense of optimism and potential to go through that and to kind of carry that through. I feel the book is ultimately and essentially really optimistic, really giving us the promise that, you know, this time is, and all the different paths that we can take and all the potential selves. They use this term, I think, all the possible future potential selves. So I get that sense of potentiality and also kind of diversification from the book. And I find it really, really empowering.
Yeah. For me, similarly, I mean, the issue of vitality assets, as someone in, you know, I'm in my early 50s, and again, I plan, you know, not to slow down. Oh, maybe I'll slow down, but I plan to be working for at least another 35 or 40 years. And so that means I really have to take care of myself. And so there's a cost to that, because I could be working at that time when I'm, you know, exercising and figuring out how to eat healthy and, you know, meditating and all these things that my husband wonders, how do you do all this and work still? But also, I think there's a rebranding that I know personally from my line of work, I want to be involved in, so that companies see, you know, that someone who's, you know, in their 60s isn't someone we want to think about, all right, how do we, you know, move them on? That people see 60, 70, 80-year-old people as, you know, vibrant, vital talent. And so I think there's a rebranding that needs to come with that. And that whole concept of juvenescence, like I need to always make sure that I'm surrounded, you know, by people of all generations and learning and never shut down. So that was inspiring to me. So with that, we're at the end of our discussion. So I want to thank Dragana Dilas and Sarah Nadif from World Education Services, who were playing with me. This is the first time we've had two guests. I have the honor of knowing both of them, and I'm inspired by how they work, live, and lead. And I can't wait to hopefully see your careers over the next 40 plus years and longer, because, you know, you guys are younger than me. But and thank you all for watching. It sounds like from all three of us, it's a definite pick up the book, 100-Year Life by Lynda Gratton and Andrew Scott. Thanks all, and don't hesitate to put thoughts, questions, and comments. We'll be following back up. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you. Bye.